The peppered moth is a classic example that shows how natural selection leads to evolution over time. Before environmental changes, most peppered moths in the population were light-colored. These light moths were well camouflaged against pale tree bark covered with lichens, so predators such as birds found it difficult to see them. As a result, they had a higher chance of surviving and reproducing. However, during the Industrial Revolution, pollution increased significantly. Soot from factories darkened the tree trunks and killed the lichens, changing the environment. This made light-colored moths more visible to predators, so they were eaten more frequently. At the same time, dark-colored moths became better camouflaged against the blackened bark, giving them a survival advantage. Because dark moths were less likely to be eaten, they survived longer and reproduced more successfully. They passed on the alleles for dark coloration to their offspring. Over time, this caused the proportion of dark moths in the population to increase, while the number of light moths decreased. This can be seen as a step-by-step process of natural selection. First, there is variation in the population, with both light and dark moths present. Then environmental change occurs due to pollution, making the habitat darker. Light moths are now more likely to be eaten, while dark moths are better camouflaged and more likely to survive. These dark moths reproduce and pass on their alleles for dark color. Over many generations, the population shifts so that dark moths become more common than light moths. In evolutionary terms, this is an example of directional selection, where one extreme form becomes more common due to environmental change. It clearly shows how natural selection can change the inherited characteristics of a population over time. Also, the snail example clearly shows how natural selection can lead to evolution over time. Before any environmental change, there is variation within the snail population. Different snails may have different shell colors such as black, gray, and white. At this stage, all variations exist in the population, and none has a strong advantage over the others. A random mutation may also produce a new variation, such as a white-shelled snail, which introduces genetic diversity into the population. After an environmental change, the conditions may change in a way that favors one variation over others. For example, the environment may make white shells more effective for camouflage. As a result, white-shelled snails are less likely to be seen and eaten by predators, so they have a higher chance of survival and reproduction compared to other shell colors. Over time, this leads to evolution. White-shelled snails survive longer and reproduce more successfully, passing on the alleles for white shell color to their offspring. As generations pass, the frequency of the white allele increases in the population, while other shell color alleles become less common. Eventually, the population becomes dominated by white-shelled snails. This diagram of natural selection in snails shows how variation in shell color can lead to evolution over time. In the snail population, there is variation in shell color, including black, gray, and white individuals. A random mutation produces a new phenotype with a survival advantage, such as a white shell that provides better camouflage in the environment. Because these white-shelled snails are less likely to be seen by predators, they survive for longer and have a greater chance of reproducing. As they pass on the allele for white shell color to their offspring, the frequency of this trait increases in the population. Over time, the white shell phenotype becomes more common, while darker shell colors become less frequent due to higher predation. This process can be broken down into the key steps of natural selection. First, there is variation within the population. Second, overproduction of offspring leads to competition for survival. Third, individuals with beneficial adaptations, such as better camouflage, are more likely to survive. Finally, these individuals reproduce and pass on their genes, leading to a gradual change in allele frequency over many generations, which is evolution.